October 27, 1962. Deep beneath the Sargasso Sea, a silence fell that was louder than any explosion. We have always been told that the Cuban Missile Crisis ended because diplomacy triumphed. We are taught that reason prevailed. But down here, inside the steel coffin of Soviet submarine B-59, history was not being written by politicians in bright offices. It was being forged in darkness, heat, and a calculated absence of sound. For 27 agonizing minutes, the world did not just hold its breath. It stood on the precipice of total annihilation, pushed there not by a glitch, but perhaps by a ghost in the machine. To understand the madness, you must first understand the environment. The air conditioning had failed days ago. The temperature inside the hull had soared above 45 degrees Celsius. The carbon dioxide levels were rising, poisoning the minds of the crew, inducing hallucinations and paranoia. They were trapped in a steel tube, hunted by the American Navy above, shaking from the tremors of depth charges. It was the perfect pressure cooker. But panic alone does not sever a connection. Panic is chaotic. What happened to the communication lines was precise, surgical.
At the height of the bombardment, the submarine went radio silent. The official report states that the batteries ran low, that the antenna was damaged by the depth charges, but declassified fragments of the maintenance logs suggest a different story. The wiring leading to the main transmitter wasn't burned out by a power surge, it was severed, cleanly cut from the inside panel. This wasn't the chaos of war. This was the silence of sabotage. Someone on board B-59 wanted the captain to believe that Moscow had already been destroyed.
Intelligence communities have long whispered about a shadow faction within the Soviet command structure, accelerationists who believed that the inevitable war with the West should happen sooner rather than later. They believed that waiting only allowed the Americans to grow stronger. Their agent was not sent to report on the war, he was sent to start it. By cutting the line to Moscow, this saboteur created a vacuum of information. And in that vacuum, the only logical conclusion for a captain under attack was that the war had already begun. Captain Valentin Savitsky was a disciplined man, but every man has a breaking point. Without orders from the Kremlin, and with explosions rocking the hull every few minutes, his mind began to fracture. He yelled that the Americans were trying to turn them into a grave. He shouted, "We're going to blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all." This was the reaction the saboteur had counted on. The psychological profile of the captain had been studied. They knew exactly how much heat to apply before he would reach for the nuclear key. The weapon on board was a T-5 nuclear torpedo. Unleashing it required a specific protocol, but protocols are fragile things in the dark. The silence from Moscow was interpreted as the silence of the grave. If Russia was gone, what reason was there to hold back? The saboteur watched from the shadows, waiting for the captain to insert the key. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Force a localized tactical launch, trigger a massive American retaliation, and reset civilization through fire. But the saboteur had miscalculated one variable, Vasily Arkhipov. While Savitsky was the captain, Arkhipov was the flotilla commander, equal in rank and carrying a veto power that was rarely used. Usually, only the captain and the political officer needed to agree. But on B-59, due to Arkhipov's presence, the vote had to be unanimous. 3 keys, 3 men. 2 had already turned. Savitsky wanted to fire. Maslenikov, the political officer, crumbled under the pressure and agreed. The world was 2/3 of the way to Armageddon. Outside, the USS Beale and other destroyers were dropping signaling depth charges, meant to force the sub to surface, not destroy it. But inside the echo chamber of the hull, they sounded like hammer blows from hell. Each explosion reinforced the lie that the war was hot, that the surface was burning. The saboteur used this. Reports indicate that during the loudest bombardments, erroneous sensor data suddenly appeared, showing incoming torpedoes that weren't there. Another phantom signal to force the hand of fate. Arkhipov stood alone against the apocalypse. He didn't just vote no, he physically intervened. Arguments erupted in the command center, shouting matches over the roar of dying machinery. Arkhipov reasoned that the Americans were signaling, not attacking. He gambled the lives of everyone on board on a hunch. But consider this. Why was he so sure? Unless he had seen something, or someone, tampering with the equipment earlier. Perhaps Arkhipov realized that the enemy wasn't just above the waves, but standing right behind him. Witness testimonies from the survivors mention a strange atmosphere in the command room, a feeling of being watched. As Arkhipov talked the captain down, calming his rage, forcing him to surrender the key, the momentum shifted. The launch was aborted. The silence of the radio was no longer a command to fire, but a mystery to be solved later. In the corner of the room, the Shadow Faction's agent realized his window of opportunity was closing. The calculated apocalypse had failed by the margin of a single man's conscience. When B-59 finally breached the surface, the fresh air rushed in, but the tension didn't leave. They were met not by nuclear fire, but by American floodlights and the jazz music playing from the decks of the U.S. destroyers. The world was still there. Moscow was still standing. The crew breathed a sigh of relief, but for the saboteur, the surfacing was a death sentence for his ideology. He had failed to ignite the great filter. But the story doesn't end on the waves of the Caribbean. Upon their return to Russia, the crew was not greeted as heroes. They were treated with suspicion. "Why didn't you die like heroes?" one admiral asked. But during the debriefing, the maintenance logs regarding the communication equipment disappeared. The specific pages detailing the cut wires and the internal tampering were redacted, then destroyed. The Soviet Union could admit to a mechanical failure, but they could never admit that a rogue element within their own ranks tried to trigger World War III without orders. Vasily Arkhipov died in 1998, hailed posthumously as the man who saved the world. But until his dying day, he remained guarded about the specifics of those 27 minutes. He spoke of the heat, the pressure, and the fear, but he never spoke publicly about the sabotage. Was he protecting the reputation of the Navy? Or was he protecting himself from the remnants of the faction that had tried to use his submarine as a lighter for the world? The scary truth isn't that we almost had a nuclear war by accident. The scary truth is that accidents can be manufactured. The technology has changed, from analog radios to fiber optics and digital commands, but the human element remains the same. The Shadow Faction didn't vanish with the Soviet Union. The desire to reset civilization, to accelerate the end to build something new, is a timeless madness. They are still waiting for the next crisis, the next moment of confusion. As we look back at the Cuban Missile Crisis, remember the 27-minute silence. It was a test run, a proof of concept that if you cut the line at the right moment, you can make sane men do insane things. The B-59 resurfaced, but the intent to destroy remains submerged, deep in the dark, waiting for someone to cut the wire again. Sleep well, but keep your eyes on the shadows.